Hello and welcome back to An Unpolished Earthling. Today we're continuing on with our look into the manifesto, Gaia United, a pragmatic path to a healthy future. And we're in part 1. We've just finished the vision and we're now looking at an example. So to give a more detailed example, let's go over one way to organize the vote with an example person, which will be me. To clear up some possible confusion, a few things need to be explained before looking at the form. There are bracketed numbers, which are the infrastructural changes category, and the infrastructural changes category and the special notes section. Bracketed numbers beside each preference is the priority that has been assigned to the category. For example, for the community aspect of this economic system, Pobu assigned a 12 for priority, and for the private garden choice of energy distribution, I assigned a 3. This means that if I had translating third person to first person as I read. If I had to live somewhere with either my preferred economic system or with a private garden, I would be 4 times happier to give up the garden than my economic system. Since the Earth is a finite and specific place, it is unlikely to be able to provide everyone with everything that they want. For instance, if everyone wanted to eat snow leopards, there simply aren't enough. Even if we were to use captive breeding, it would take many human generations before we could breed enough snow leopards for us all to devour them. To determine who gets to devour them, we have to have a system of trade-offs based on individual preferences. So if you would rather eat a snow leopard than anything else, you might want to live in the Himalayas as a nomad. You might have to live in the Himalayas as a nomad with nothing but a tent and a spear, and the right to eat all the snow leopard you want. Of course, not all resources need to be consumed, and hopefully no one decides to eat snow leopards. This is a basic system of priority ordering, as it is set up that either you get what you want or you don't. However, the world is a lot more complicated than that, so the system we will actually use will be more along the lines of this. So I'll throw this up on screen here. Population 3,000. The first 10 is my priority, and then the 2 in the smaller brackets next to 200 is I'm saying for every change of 200 in my population, I would consider that a 2-point loss to my priority satisfaction. So, for example, if I was in a population of 2,800 people, I would consider that a 8 instead of a 10 for my priority. And for strawberries, I would say I want strawberries, my priority is 5, but if I can't have them, raspberries would give me a 3 for priority satisfaction. This makes for a much more complicated system, but also a much fairer one. So for example, if you said no matter what you want to live in Hawaii, and for some reason you couldn't get that, that may seem like a huge chunk of your priority lost, but in reality you probably did want some food and some clothing and a home and some other things as well, right? So having a sliding scale with substitutions gives the system far greater detail, reducing inconsistencies such as the one we just discussed, but it'll never be perfect, but it can be better. And that's another thing that goes through the entire point of the plan is everything we're saying can be adjusted by the people who are using the system in the future. So even the wording of this example, if they're like, I don't like the way he wrote that sentence, you can go in and edit and change it so that future people reading about it will have an easier time understanding it. Now, it should also be noted that someone might want a very unique lifestyle and be able to attain 100% priority satisfaction without compromising anyone else's. In this case, the computer would allow them complete satisfaction, as it would not be seen as a violation of fairness. In other words, the system should never be used to reduce highest possible satisfaction, only to find the most satisfactory compromises where they are necessary. The infrastructural changes category is to determine how much energy is to put into construction in a year. If a group decides to abandon a dojo to build a theater, there will be energy required to make that transition. Allocating a portion of energy to a budget every year allows us to determine how quickly we can adapt our infrastructure to our changing desires. The special notes category is exactly that, special notes that further specify the voters' preferences and priorities. So now let's take a look at what the vote might look like. So at the top we got my name, we got general features, and I got a 122 out of 333 total priority points here. So I'm saying of all of my priorities, about a third of them are focused on my general features. Type of habitat. For example, nomadic, monastic, village, city, megalotropolis, or hybrid. I'd like a hybrid model where I have many small communities connected to a city core. I would like 5,000 people in my community and 3.5 million in the core, which is a pretty big city core, but a pretty small community as well. I'd like a temperate coastal climate. And for overall layout, I prefer slightly more individual than communal. I do appreciate having communal spaces, but I like to have my own personal space as well, and I'd like to have my own private garden. And as for the city core itself, I would prefer that to be a little bit more individualistic than communal as well. So moderate to high individuality, specifically a central public plaza, theater, parks, and restrooms, surrounded by a commercial area focused on eating and entertainment, surrounded by goods and services, and then an outer ring being the more industrial sector, stretching out into farms and other resource collection. So that's just a rough description of what I want, and I'm only giving a 5 priority for that. So essentially I'm saying I would much rather live in a nice warm place than have the exact city style I care about. I'm prepared to compromise on the style of city. For economic system, community, I want it mostly communal. Non-specifically, I would simply meet with everyone in my community in a town hall where we would all discuss how to arrange our community. On some kind of periodic basis, we would all reconvene to make adjustments as necessary. In other words, I'd like to live in a community small enough that I actually know everyone in the community and we just talk to each other to figure out how things are going on. And if it was someone's chore to look after the greenhouse that day and they don't show up, well, we know who he is, we know where he lives, we can knock on the door and say, hey, how are you feeling, and figure it out from there. City core, I would choose an open free market system, the fine details of which will be developed in discussion with other members of the economy. Essentially, I'll only be participating in this economy for the sake of luxury goods and services. So I would want my community to provide everything I need for survival, so that if I do want luxury stuff, I can go get it. I can participate in the city, but I don't have to participate in the city to survive, right? So because of this, economic incentive would have to be pretty high for me to be willing to work. In other words, I'd have to agree that if I go off and do some labor in the downtown core, the goods I'm going to get out of it are worth my time to do that. I wouldn't have to work just to live. Hopefully this would nurture a passion-driven economy where people are doing what they love and exchanging their surplus creations for the creations of others. For a political system, I prefer a direct democracy in my community that resembles my economic choices, but I would literally meet with the whole community to make decisions. So the specific workings of this process would take shape after the first few meetings. So in other words, in my political system, I'm not saying I want some person in charge or how it's going to be. I want to go talk with the people and see what everyone feels and figure it out with them. That may be complicated and take some time, but I'm open to having different community setups. City core, direct democracy again, but with special treatment for minority groups. So for example, the majority might make a law against indecent exposure, but a group of naturalists who make up 10% of the population could be awarded a special area of the city where clothing is optional, although they would still have to obey the general law when moving into the more public space. So kind of breaking it up into a mosaic, where everyone thinks that you should be able to swear and belch and yell all day long. Well, maybe not everyone in the city wants to be around that, but we don't need to make it prohibited so that those people who want that could never have it. We could perhaps just make an area of the city where they could do something that the rest of the city doesn't like. Now, due to the advanced computer assisting voting processes, there would be no need for people to serve in this government. So all voting would be on the actual issues and laws and not one politician or another. So yeah, there wouldn't be a mayor of the city who decides these things for us once we elect them. It would be we all vote and say, yeah, I'm okay with having that area of the city set aside for this, or no, I'm not, and we can see how people are feeling. Now, this does not mean that politicians will not arise, as if one is able to sway the opinion of a crowd, then in a way one could still be a politician, although one could not be said to be in power and would have no special rights, even if that someone were to practically command the majority vote of a whole city. So I'm always looking for problems within the ideas I'm presenting and imagining how people could try to abuse it. So in this situation, if there was a person who was very charismatic and everyone wanted to listen to them, no matter how much the people wanted to support them, they could never give the person their energy budget. They could never give up their freedoms and give up their rights. They could allocate some of their energy budget towards the other person's endeavor. Maybe he wants to build an airfield and they all say, okay, we'll all put our energy into the airfield because this is what you want. And so people could have influence like that, but they would never have direct control. And if you changed your mind, you could always take that back. Language. I like English. I don't really like English. It's the language I grew up with, so it's easy for me to speak. But the more I've learned about other languages and sampled other languages, the more I think that English is not a very easy language to learn. There's a lot that doesn't make sense in it, and I sometimes wish that the world had some sort of basic international language that made more sense and was a little less confusing. But for my personal ease of life, I would choose an English community because it's what I'm used to at the moment. Religion. Free. So I don't want to live in a community where people are told what to believe. I don't want to be in a community where no one's allowed to have beliefs. I just want people to not be persecuted for their beliefs. And I would rather be in a community with no religious persecution than be in a community where I get to speak the language that I know. So if all of the English communities in the world were specifically Christian only, I'd rather learn French or Spanish and live somewhere else. Allocation of energy budget. So this is sort of the core of the plan, but you can see how the vote covers all sorts of stuff. This is the energy budget portion. So here I've got a list for in my community. Food, water, clothing, home, private garden, education, healthcare, public safety, intra-community transport, and inter-community transport, as in transport within the community or transport between communities. Town hall, dojo, parks, rivers, lakes, and infrastructural changes. And you can see that most of my budget goes to food, water, and clothing, with only 3% to home. I don't need a very big home. But you gotta remember that once your home is built, that surface area that it takes up will always be off of your vote for years to come. Whereas if you were to say build a pair of sunglasses just one time, once it's built, it's not on your next year's budget anymore. And then my priority points, food, water, clothing, and home are my highest priorities for sure. And the community total takes up 60% of my ecological footprint. So almost 2/3 of all of my energy is going into just my ability to survive and keep my community healthy. Then for the city core, just throwing out random things I might want, sunglasses, movies, music, restaurants, quality footwear, adventure clothing, camping gear, horseback riding, library, personal computers, theater, art, cutlery, light aircraft, intercity transportation, wine, and infrastructural changes. So where I wanted 15% of my total footprint towards my food, the biggest thing here I would want is intercity transportation, light aircraft, and personal computers, where some things like sunglasses are only 0.5% of my energy budget. As for priorities, all of those things are pretty low priorities right there, whereas in my community, it's obviously a much higher priority than I get food and water. And then you have a grand total as well, and you can see how all of your priorities stack up. Then for special notes, which is a reasonable chunk of my priorities as well, within food, so you have food in terms of how much of your energy budget are you putting towards food production. But then what specific food do you want? Maybe you don't care, maybe you do. Specifically, I like strawberries, I like wheat, I like oranges, bananas, tea, cacao, rice, fish, and potatoes. I like a lot of other things too. Those are just some examples. And I put different priorities to each of those things because I would rather live in a community where I get to eat strawberries than in a community where I get to eat potatoes. Not that I don't want potatoes. Now, education. Small school with basic mandatory education for young children to understand the ways of our world and our society. Basic skills like math, reading, writing, and simple physics. Further education would take place under supervision of older teachers, directed by the child's curiosity with a global communication network as the source to almost all recorded human knowledge. So in my community, I would want everyone to grow up with a basic understanding of how life works, how their voting system works, how the community works. But beyond that, I wouldn't necessarily go for a high school kind of a setting. It would be more like a curious-driven university setting, but you're not committed to a specific degree while you're studying. So you basically just go and learn by curiosity, and if someone feels like they're more interested in a certain field, they would keep studying in that field and become an expert in it eventually. So a much looser way of going about education. And then for public safety, I would want a small group of individuals who act as guardians in the community, trained in first aid, mediation, psychology, and basic combat. I don't like the idea of having to have combat, but you got to be realistic. And so if there is a kerfuffle and someone needs to intervene, these people would basically first go to try to talk down the situation, de-escalate it, and try to separate the people. But if necessary, they might have to defend themselves or defend other people, right? So they would patrol the community, looking out for its people, helping those in need, stopping violence, and mediating where quarrels are escalating towards violence. So hopefully trying to prevent anything from getting out of hand before it happens by being there, being present. If someone has a problem, you have someone to talk to who can help out and be a non-biased mediator before it gets out of hand, right? They would also uphold whatever law the community comes up with. And again, that would be community-based law. I can't say what the laws in one community would be to another. And so that's it for an example vote. And as you can see, the great thing here is you get to imagine a blank slate. If you could have any lifestyle, anywhere in the world, living in any kind of community, doing anything you want, any kind of economic system or not, what would you do? What would that be like for you? What would your choice be? And I'm not sure if the majority of people on this planet have ever really had a chance to think about that and consider it. I believe that most of us have been told that we don't have a choice and that things are just the way they are and they'll always be that way. So this is your chance to imagine something completely different. What would you do if you really had the freedom and the choice to do it? What would that look like? In our next clip, we're going to look at the assumptions, where some of this seems like it falls apart, but it's definitely interesting to think about. I hope to see you again soon.